Welcome to Leadership from the Cross with Pastor Scott Thom. This broadcast is devoted to taking your ministry and life to the next level. No matter what the level you are at, let us help advance your leadership skills. Leadership from the Cross is a ministry of Cross Christian Fellowship in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And now, Pastor Scott Thom.
All right, we want to welcome you back into Leadership from the Cross. Maybe we haven't seen you for a week, or maybe you're binge listening, but I've got another treat for you as I've had my time in California and New Mexico, and then working with just wonderful guys and seeing God raise up these godly men and send them out. I have another individual who I highly admire. I admire his heart, and I've always loved watching him minister and see how he just had a real passion for souls. And I knew him back in the 1980s, late 1980s, in what was Calvary Chapel. West Covina became Calvary Chapel Golden Springs later on when they moved to Diamond Bar, California. And Jim went out to an area that was fairly open in a way, and it was out in Joplin, Missouri, if I remember right, and then served as pastor there for a while and left to go back to the West Coast, and then was doing wonderful work there. Called back, helped a number of churches plant, if I recall, and then is in Kansas City and is senior pastor there. And so we want to bring in Jim Stewart and talk to him about the just wonderful experience he's been in and tap his knowledge and wisdom of all these things that he's been through. And so, hey, we haven't connected for a while, but welcome into the show, Jim.
Well, thanks, Scott. It's always great to see you. We see each other in conferences and, around the country in various places. So it's always great to reconnect. And those were very fond memories back in the day, West Covina and what fond memories. I just can't speak enough about that particular season for all of us. It was a real wave of guys going out and getting trained. And I don't think that wave's ever stopped for any of us. We keep watching people move, the Lord moving them through various places of the world and the country. And so very exciting and good stuff.
Yeah, and we were in, which was Tuesday morning meetings together, kind of a leadership training that Pastor Rawl did with the staff and other people that brought him in. And I was envious when you went out. But why don't you tell us, at that point, back in, when was it, 88, 89?
Yeah, that's correct, 89.
You were called out, and kind of take us through that. How did you know you were called out? How did you know where you were called to? Because a lot of guys are thinking, I'm called, but I have no idea where God's going to put me. Take us through that and how it affected your family.
Well, one of the things that I remember being taught, one just from listening to Pastor Chuck over the years, and then who was a consummate church planter and pioneering, and really training guys to go out. And one of the things that he said, in order for a church to justify its existence, they need to fit a niche, as it were, in the community or in the society. So in other words, we all should be community driven in the fact that we need to have a purpose for being wherever we are. And I just had a burden to go somewhere where the style of ministry that was, a little bit more contemporary and that model that we like to follow of simply teaching through the Bible, verse by verse, book by book. And I had been visiting a friend in Southwest Missouri that I had gone to high school with, and when I'd come back to the Lord, I had known the Lord as a young person and had kind of gotten distant from the Lord and then returned to the Lord. And then that's when we all met up at Rawls. But I know that part of what my heart was to go where this style of ministry wasn't happening. And so I went back and was visiting this friend. And when we were leaving this little visit, we were just starting the pastoral school. And I knew the whole time that I was at West Covina that I was a short timer there. I knew it was God's purpose for us to, my family, to be just trained up and and to go. I thought in those early days, I honestly thought everybody at church was doing the same thing I was doing. I just thought that's what it was all about. I thought, man, this is what we're supposed to do. We know Jesus, and we got to get the word out before he returns. And, it's kind of funny. I still live this way. I still think that way. I still function like that, and about getting the word out, making Jesus famous. And so we'd been praying about I've been praying fervently about what the Lord's leading might be. And I was driving away from Joplin, from visiting a friend, again, who I'd led to the Lord over the phone over a several month period of time. And he and I used to party together when we were in high school and stuff. And then when I came back to the Lord, I just kind of went out pursuing my friends, wanting to share the Lord with them. And anyway, we visited and we were driving away, and the Lord put it on my heart. Hey, right there, there was a little a piece of property right next to where my friend was building a house. So, I want you to build a house right there and move right there and live there. I thought, wow, that's kind of crazy. You think you're hearing from God, but you really wonder. While God's speaking this to my heart, I want you to come here. I want you to plant a church here. I want all this. While God's speaking to my heart that way, at that time, my wife is telling me while we're driving, we've got 3 little boys at the time, young guys, tiny ones. Right. And we're driving away in our little minivan, and she's telling me, oh my, I'll be glad to get back home. This is just, I can't imagine ever living someplace like this. This is just, it was August, and anybody who's in the Midwest in August knows the air doesn't move much, and it's getting pretty thick and hot and so on. And so, I remember, her just kind of telling me, I thought, oh my, I'm driving, it's 1,600-mile drive. So it's a lot of time to think. So I'm just thinking to myself, my Lord, you've got a bit of a problem here. I'm willing to do whatever you want, but I'm not going to tell her anything about this. You're going to have to tell her. What was wild, Scott, was that, sometimes we can take things upon ourselves when we really ought not to. And I really left that in the hands of the Lord. And I'm so thankful, because about 6 months into pastoral school, you remember when Raul had kind of done this separate, it was the first time he'd ever done a separate pastoral training thing. And you remember you were one of the teachers during the curriculum. And I remember exactly where I was and everything. I was driving over on Irwindale Boulevard, coming back from church, heading up to, I lived in Glendora, and I was driving over Irwindale Boulevard driving over the 210, and right there by the Miller Brewery. And I remember driving up over the road and just coming up over the freeway. And I remember my wife asked me, so, hey, I know we're not going to stick around, the area. Where do you think God's going to sending us? And I said, that's a great question. I still was not prepared to introduce her to the idea. And she said, I said, well, what do you think? Do you have any ideas? And she goes, I think the Lord has spoken something to my heart, but I just can hardly believe it. But I think he's put something on my heart. I said, wow, well, I'm thinking, good golly, who knows what this could be, And she says, the Lord's put Joplin, Missouri on my heart. I go, wow, isn't that something? I said, that's exactly what God's put on my heart. So I think, isn't it good to wait and let the Lord knit those things together? Because one of the things, and I know it sounds a bit crass maybe to say it this way, and maybe I'm trying to think of better words, but, you just don't want to be dragging your wife around the country with you, forcing her to be in places she doesn't want to be. If God's called you as a young man or as a person, to serve him in this way, whatever your age, if God's called you, God's called your spouse and your family. And, we've never, my kids could live anywhere in the country, and they all live in Kansas City metro. Even currently, it's become home for us. And so I think that idea of calling and God putting these things on our hearts is so important. If God calls us, he's going to prepare the way for us. It doesn't make it all easy, but it's steps of faith is what I would really encourage.
Yeah. And I think that's so important and so wise that you're speaking to these guys going out. They have to be one in heart with their wife and go out there. But even when you are and you're united in heart, it's not easy to plant a church. So walk us through. Okay, Now you're moving, you're going out there, you got to plant a church. How did that all come about? How did you get started out there?
I even before we left, I was a contractor. So I had a construction company that I had to sell. We had a home that we had to sell. We were leaving all of our family. I knew this one friend there, and that was it. We knew no one else. And really, literally at that time, culturally, the different parts of the country are different, and so going to this part of the country was a culture shock for us as well. And when we got into the Midwest, we realized that things are different. And one of the things I think that's so important is not to be too quick on thinking you've got everything figured out for everybody else. Certainly we have a message in our heart, and certainly it is the gospel, but it's about rebuilding relationships, right? That's what the Lord did with us. He came alongside and kind of drew us in by the Holy Spirit, and we opened our hearts to him, and he poured himself into us, and then he lives within us. And there's this ongoing journey with Jesus in a relationship. And so I think developing relationships became very important. So maybe not knowing anyone was more to an advantage in order to have friendships and relationships and the kids to have friends. And so we had to build relationships, Mm-hmm. And so once we got here, that was the plan, was just to kind of, I went specifically with the intent to plant a church. I don't think you should bear no shame in that. A lot of times people act like you got to be on some covert op thing or something. And it just, there's nothing wrong with having a purpose and intent to do what God's called you to do. I think that's good. I think that's healthy. And so getting here into this part of the country, we just started a little Bible study in our home, and, neighbors, friends. My friend was already attending another church. He didn't come to our church until a few years later. That wasn't part of it. It was just different people we were meeting would come to our home. And then fairly quickly it grew. Now, I will say I was just turning 30 when we went out in 1989. And so planting at that age and getting to know people, most of the people that we interacted with that were receptive to the gospel, to be honest with you, were probably in their late teens, mid to latter teens, or very early 20s. So our church was very young. And to this day, the person that's pastoring it was one of those young guys that we met in the early days. Uh-huh. So I'm not sure if I answered that question very well.
No, that's good. Yeah. So, that's great. I think that's fantastic advice, because so many guys come out, they're trying to evangelize. People see themselves as a target and some kind of goal rather than building relationships. And I think people are going to respond much better when you are out there to build relationships, to love on people, and they are really your end goal rather than means to justify, the end. And that's so valuable. Great stuff.
I really think, one of the things that we've observed over the years is it's easy to fall prey to a statistical driven mentality and ministry. And while certainly we want to see fruit, we just have to determine what biblical fruit is. And if biblical fruit is transformed lives, which we know it to be, that's part of the fruit. But the fruit is of God's Spirit's work within us is that love, which is obviously a derivative of a relationship, with God. And I really tell guys when they come out, because I help guys planting in and around this part of the country, and I really encourage them to get a small barbecue grill or a large one, depending upon what they can afford. And after they gather with people, whether it's an evening or a Sunday morning, whatever time frame they have, it doesn't cost much to get some hot dogs going. It doesn't cost much to get a few hamburgers going, make some cookies, get some chips, and just hang out and talk with people and fellowship with them. Because that time, so much happens in those moments, so much more than what can even happen in a teaching setting. So we want to work out, right? Work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. We want to work out what God's worked in. And that's our role in pastoral care, is to help people work out what God's working in. And a lot of times we have both of those roles, in that we are sharing from the front the truth, the God's word. We're sharing teaching. But then to sit around and let someone decompress, they will learn to talk about spiritual matters and learn that process of healthy fellowship and development, and what we know to be really discipleship. And then they will start doing the same thing, but we have to model that. And I think sometimes there is an element of formality to that. I don't disagree with that, but there's also just that idea of personal interaction. You remember in the scriptures where it talks about some of the disciples were hanging out with Jesus, and I'm paraphrasing, but they asked him, kind of like, hey, where do you stay? Where are you staying? And one of the what they're really asking, because they wanted to spend more time with him.
Right.
And what they were really asking, I'm pretty sure this is the correct understanding of it, was they were in the original language, kind of like, hey, where do you kick your sandals off? Or where do you, just kind of kick back and hang out? Where do you stay? What? Because they wanted to hang out with the Lord, because this is where you start to find out who somebody really is.
Right.
And so I think sometimes we come out of a larger church environment, and when we're starting something, it certainly isn't a mega ministry. And so when we come out of a really large church environment, sometimes we've lost sight of like that intimacy, so to speak, or that type of small group setting is kind of not so visible in a real large church sometimes, especially with the senior pastor or the lead pastor. But I think in church planting, we have to be willing to do that.
Right. And it can be emotional connection, a physical connection. Now, because of that, and you're doing this, a lot of hard work to plant a church, and you have visions. Everybody has a vision of planting and doing well, and it's a battle. And I always tell these guys when they go out, the first 3 to 5 years is more about the character and training of the pastor than it is building the church and church numbers for most guys. And
yeah,
so
I would agree.
What's it like? I know for myself, there's emotional ups and downs. What has been one of the most difficult times for you, one of the most raw times for you, maybe emotionally draining or disappointing, and kind of how did you get over that?
I think all of us have a healthy drive to see God move and do something. So I want to say that in advance, because I think that's okay to have a healthy drive to see that. But again, keeping in check the fact that the results aren't necessarily up to us. We're really distributors, not producers. And remembering that is so important, because it's easy to get caught up in, am I producing? And then again, you have to redetermine what is fruit. Is fruit based on the relationship or not? So I think sometimes when I say that, is what I'm driving at, is sometimes I know for me, it was easy to get kind of discouraged, saying, well, gosh, we kind of hit this ceiling. We're not really growing much past this, and we can start thinking different things about how it goes. I did make a transition during that. I was there about 10 years and planted and turned the church over. And then, really was led by the Lord to go out, and we were doing a lot of missions travel. So I was traveling in and out. I've actually been doing this same thing that we're talking about church planting, halfway around the world in Japan. And so every chance I got, I would take a week or two, and I'd fly over to Japan and take a musician with me or different people, and we would take groups over and I'm just watching. I was just watching on Facebook earlier today. We started doing these conferences with them, and we would always go over and do the conference and stuff. And now they do the conference themselves. We don't even go. I mean, they're totally self-sufficient, and you can kind of feel bad about that a little bit, but it's really great. I mean, we're supposed to be scaffolding sometimes and not a permanent structure. But, I think when I realized that some things were changing in this missions thing that we were doing, and the way some stuff was going was kind of outside of the scope of what I knew God had purposed for my life and the calling and gifting I had. And so I needed to kind of step aside from that. That transition was very, very difficult. And so it was then we really knew that the Lord purposed for us to get back to the middle of the country. And so we did that. And a lot of people had a lot of different views about that. Like they didn't think that was a good idea or whatever. But we were really following what we really believed the Lord was doing in our lives. And there was a season where I didn't, like it wasn't a long season, but a little bit of time where I just didn't really have a permanent pulpit. I was guest speaking a lot. But then, this other guy called me and said, "Hey, there's this group about 2 hours away. Would you drive down there?" And it was Fort Smith, Arkansas. And I said, "Wow, that's a couple hours." Yeah. But, so I'll go down and meet with them and see, So I ended up going down there and until it was several months, maybe a year, until we got another guy that was able to pass, because I knew I wasn't going to pastor that, and planted that. There was a small group, and it established a great thing going and turned it over to another guy. And I think during all those times that wondering, man, what is God doing? And why does it seem like it's not going like I think it should go? I think we get preconceived ideas in our minds of how ministry should be. And I think the thing that I learned while I was in Joplin for that 10 years was I was bivocational. You need to be prepared for that, by the way. Guys, bivocational is a big part of church planting. You need to be able to have some kind of a skill set or a trade or something that you can do to provide for your family while you're, kind of birthing a church, because there's a lot of times very limited resource. And of course, it depends on where you are and, God's timing and how that goes. I've seen it go all kinds of ways, right? So, but one of the things that I found in that first 10 years was I had a young family. I was really full-time pastoring. I had a construction business. I was building homes. And so I was very busy doing that. And then I, had little young family and a marriage. And you don't really realize how tired you can be, or you don't realize how even run down you can be physically, mentally, emotionally, and even spiritually. And, I remember looking back on this now, and I've told many, this is one really key thing that I've learned, and I maintain this, I practice this to this day. Quarterly, so that's every 3 months, once every 3 months, in the course of every year, I either go to a pastors and leaders conference somewhere, I go to a short-term little mission excursion, something along that line. And I really try to go with my wife. That's what we try to always do it together, because I think you don't realize sometimes it's taxing doing what we do sometimes. Right. And there's a kind of an accumulative thing that can happen. And it's important for us to get a different scenery around us. This is if we can, let's put it this way. I don't think we can afford not to do this kind of thing, because I think we can get so spent. Now, if the best you can do in the quarter is leave on a Thursday and meet up with some other Christian brothers, a brother and sister in the Lord, or, if that's the best you can do, still do it and pray and seek the Lord and talk about spiritual matters and focus on the Lord. I like the short-term missions concept because it really helps you refocus. It's a budgetary matter. You have to budget this within even a small church. You have to budget this, because if the pastor isn't healthy, spiritually, emotionally, physically, well rested and healthy outlook wise, even, then you're not going to be much good to the people. You're not going to care for the sheep the way they need to be cared for. So I've made it my practice to go to, and there's a lot of options out there. There's a lot of healthy, good things that are in close proximity to most of us, that it really doesn't even cost much if you have to fly, a lot of these places. You just find the place in advance. For example, a lot of I don't know about a ton of other different ones, Scott, but I know that the Calvary Chapel, a lot of the regional conferences are all open,
Yeah.
Anybody can go to those. Well, matter of fact, we see each other at a lot of those.
Yeah.
So, I just think, and, if you live in a place where it's snowing and you can go down to Malcolm's in Florida.
Yeah.
Hey, that's a great place to go in January.
And a lot of guys love doing that too. They love to accept his invitations to go out there. Matter of fact, I was just in Colorado, in northern Colorado, with one of the pastors there, Dave Pierce, and he was real excited because there was snow all over the ground there, and about a foot of it, and he was taking off to be in Florida for a while. So I wholeheartedly agree. We need to take those Sabbaths and time where you can get away, get re-energized. And even sometimes if you're flying and working and doing other things, if it's concentrating on something other than your burden at home, and it's something that's going to invigorate you because you get to see other people getting saved or other ministries going on or finding out something new in ministry or a new way of doing something, it can always help you come back and refocus and have hope and push through some areas and be powerful and energized because, you've had that rest. And I wholeheartedly agree. That's fantastic advice.
Yeah. And I really, I'm very serious. I really aimed for and still do and have for the last probably 15 years, quarterly. And it sounds like a lot. It really does. But if you can get away for 3 or 4 days a quarter and just focus on the Lord and, like you say, get invigorated, interact with some other ministries. I think the thing I like about throwing in a short-term missions thing in there, a lot of times you can schedule those things. You leave on a Monday and come back on a Friday night or Saturday, and you don't miss your Sunday morning. And so it's not burdensome to try and find someone for that. Mm-hmm. And if you have a midweek, you can usually find a young person or someone in the community or that you find that would be trustworthy, or an elder or something that would be able to fill in on a midweek. But it kind of allows that time to, especially on short-term missions things, you can kind of really recalibrate what God is doing in your life. I think sometimes, so let's talk about something that is along the same line. Tied to that is a negativity. Uh-huh. That's my point. When we get spent, sometimes we can get a little bit negative, or we can start just shooting from the hip. Our judgment's a little bit impaired, possibly.
Start barking at the sheep.
Yeah, it's kind of thing. It just can get a little bit rough around the edges, maybe. I think everybody's personality is different too, Scott. Some people just get more withdrawn. Some people get more aggressive. Some people, it's just a personality thing, but it's out of balance either way is the thought. It's more fleshy than spiritual, right? And so I think the thought was that, we can kind of get, when we get spent like that, we get a little more like ourselves and less like the Lord, maybe. And that's not our intent. But I think that perspective getting readjusted, recalibrated is so beneficial to readjust and rethink. Because I think I find even, and this happens to this day, I find there's times where, you've got someone that's upset with a decision that's been made, or a few people that are upset, and now they don't want to come back. And
that never happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness. Happen.
This is it. If people aren't familiar with that, you will become familiar with it, and it becomes a way of life. But the idea is that we can become so focused on even in our outreach endeavors, on the way the results we want to see, we can become so focused on what we think God should be doing, but He isn't, that we can miss what God is doing.
Amen.
I tell you, that was one of the most powerful lessons I've learned, man, to just make sure that I'm leaving the results up to the Lord, that I'm just being obedient to do what He has purposed for me to do. And if I'm doing that, God's going to take care of the balance of it. And then I get to enjoy what God is doing. We can get so focused on the 3 or 4 families that maybe have chosen to go somewhere else because they're upset about something. And then you've got these 100 families or 10 families or 15 families or whatever, hundreds of families or whatever it might be, we can be so focused on the 4 families that aren't there that we're not caring for the families that are there. And so we want to be busy about what God is doing and focus on what he is doing than what we think he should be doing and he's not.
Right. And then you get discouraged and you're pushing doors that he may not want you to go through either at all or not yet. And we're really kind of missing the boat. Hey,
yes.
we've only got a few minutes left.
Sure.
And I want to respect your time, but
sure.
I'm just so curious about Japan and the work that you guys did there. Could you take 2 or 3 minutes and just talk about what's happening in Japan and your experiences there and just bring us up to date?
Well, Lance Cook and I from Calvary Chapel in La Habra, he called me. This is this has probably been almost 20 years ago now, or right at 20 years ago. Had called me, said, "Hey, I want to see if you, Lance." We were in pastoral school together at the same time, and he had asked. He said, "Hey, I've got this guy that I know," and I knew who he was too. He said, "We know this one guy. He's gone back to Japan, and he wants us to come over and just we just want to encourage him and stuff. He doesn't know any other believers and stuff." And he's okay. So that sounds good, So I told him, "Let me pray about it, but that I might be in." And so I go get my passport. I agree to go. We fly over there together, and we only know this one person. And so it was like a James Bond movie. We get off the plane and there's they've got this one person that we've never met them. I said, "Who are we supposed to talk to?" Anybody who would know Lance, this is just classic. He says, "Well, I don't know, man. I just know we're supposed to, there's somebody going to be there to meet us." Oh, okay. That's real reassuring. We go through customs, we get off the plane. Mind you, we're on the other side of the world, and I haven't traveled a whole lot like that before. And so it was kind of like, this is kind of interesting. And this one person comes up to us. Obviously, we stand out quite a bit. And so they come up to us, "Hey, are you Jim, you Land?" Yep. Well, that's all they could say was our names. They shuttle us to this bus, buy us our little ticket. They say that when you get off, there's another person that's going to meet you. Okay. So we get into town. That person meets us. We don't know. That person comes up to us and said, "Okay, here's, let's go." We walk kind of through town to Tokyo. These are all like 2-hour excursions. They put us on this train. We go on this train. And then the guy says, "Hey, I've got to go a different direction now, but I'm getting off here. But at the next stop, you guys get off, go outside of the subway station. And there's this statue of a dog. It's a Shibuya station." He goes, go out, stand by the statue, and this guy's going to come up and find you there. Seriously, it was like a James Bond movie. It was just hilarious. So finally, we get out by the statue of the dog. We hear this guy yelling for us, "Jim Lance, Jim Lance." We look over, and there's our friend, the one guy we know in Tokyo. And there's millions and millions and millions of people there. But we found made the connection with the one guy. And, we visited with him a couple different, evenings, just him and this gal that he knew. And she was a believer too. And he said, "Well, there's these people I know at work that I've been sharing with." And so we go down to his workplace in the evening. He had gotten permission to use this little meeting room, downtown Tokyo. So we're kind of in the bowels of Tokyo. Is just huge. We're downtown down there. He goes, "It's probably maybe a dozen or more, roughly a dozen, maybe 14 people there." He says, "These are all people I've been talking with." And he goes, "Would you just," so Lance and I just kind of tag team it. Mm-hmm. And he does the interpreter. He kind of does these little Bible studies and stuff. And then we said at the end, "Well, hey, we kind of going to talk to him about what it would be like to say the sinner's prayer. What is a step of faith? It's opening your heart up to the Lord and this kind of thing." And we were floored. All of them want to know Jesus. They all accept the Lord.
Awesome.
To this day, when I go over there, I still see some of those same people. It's just great. And that was kind of the birthing of what we would take bands over there and different groups and pastors and different people over just to teach and stuff. So eventually, more churches started up. We connected with other believers that wanted to be a part of what we were doing and wanted to kind of, work together as groups. And then we started doing these little conferences. And now, like I said, I've been watching, they're doing great, man. There's several churches throughout mainland Japan. And these are people now, though, that are coming in there with the purpose to plant and are connecting with other people that all the churches are smaller. I mean, there's nothing gigantic going on. It's a fraction of a percent of the population that actually are believers, true believers in Jesus Christ. Right. So tremendous opportunity to share the gospel there. So that's kind of what's going on there, man. It's great, right. Great work. God's doing great things. It was really like watching and being a part of just Acts.
Yeah.
The book of Acts, just watching it just kind of happen. To this day, I don't know that as much as I'd like to know. I probably know more than a lot of people might about the Japanese culture, but I'm no expert. God just uses the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. God uses the base things of this world to create something out of nothing.
Right.
That's just what God does. And we're experiencing that here in Kansas City. God's, we have a radio station here in town that broadcasts throughout the whole metro, covers 2.2 million people. And then through the internet, covers the internet and stuff too. It's just crazy, crazy stuff.
Man. Well, good stuff. And the time flies so fast. Maybe, in the future we'll have you on again. And
I'd love to do it.
And especially for our online college, for the Shepherd School, this is the type of thing we're going to do is get these pastors and leaders and thought leaders to come on, and we'll videotape those, and which works for the online school as opposed to just the MP3 player. It doesn't work too well, but this is the type of thing that we're going to have in the school. But I want to thank you, and
thank you, Scott. Appreciate
there's probably going to be a number of people that might want to get in touch with you. And so what would be one of the ways that they could contact you?
Well, you can go to our website, which is calvarychapelkc.com. And you can see what we've got going, and you can link to the radio station. The radio station is Fountain Radio, just like you'd think a water fountain, but a fountainradio.com. You can check things out there. And you can also email me direct if you want. And that's Pastor Jim at calvarychapelkc.com. So if you state why you're contacting me, then I'll be able to, but because I get a lot of various emails, but I'm always happy to respond and interact and talk with people, especially those who are desiring to involve themselves in planting churches and stuff. And like I said, I'm still very active in that, both locally and abroad. We still go over, we're involved in helping guys do this same thing in Africa, Central Eastern Africa, and in other parts of the world as well, too, in the United States. So it's what it's all about, right?
It's what it's all about, and that's what our heart is. And so why we launched ccfcollege.com, and it's a 2-year program that guys can go in, men and women, get trained up for ministry, not necessarily to plant a church, but we are looking to plant 100 churches in the next 20 years. And so part of this broadcast is just to attract those guys and connect them with pastors like yourself, or with our college, where we can train them up, sponsor them, send them out. And that's something that's live going right now. ccfcollege.com, just like Charlie Frank college.com. And we'd love to hear from you and engage with us on Facebook. And so they can just look up Pastor Scott Thom on Facebook, or Leadership from the Cross on Facebook. So we'd love to hear from you. Well, thanks, Jim. And it's been a long time, coming, and I really appreciate it. It was awesome. Really good study.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And I hope we can do this in the future again, Scott. I really look forward to it.
Me too.
You have been listening to Leadership from the Cross with Pastor Scott Thom of Cross Christian Fellowship in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Check out Pastor Scott's ministry training school and his other radio show, No Other Doctrine, by visiting our website at crossfellowship.org. That's crossfellowship.org. Also, you can visit our Facebook page at Facebook.com/Leadership from the Cross.